Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
AI, that's artificial intelligence, and ethical art. So, a little bit of a departure for us, but something that I think we're both pretty interested in, and it's becoming more and more and more a part of all of our lives. Even if we're not using AI to generate artwork ourselves, we might be tempted to. Somebody is, right? It's being used for businesses to create logos, there's memes, there's probably going to be a lot of political ads that incorporate AI-generated art, I expect, in this upcoming political season. So, it's a topic definitely worth delving into. And what made you want to dig into this particularly, Dan?
Well, we're here for practical, useful ethics or philosophy, and so this is a topical thing that's happening in the world over the last several years, and it's only going to continue to go forward. And if we're not thinking about this in kind of deep and systematic way, then we're going to either make bad arguments for the things that we want, or we're going to make bad decisions. And so trying to apply the tools that we have within philosophy to help us make better decisions is very germane to this program.
Yeah, and if we're not doing it ourselves, somebody's going to be making arguments to us, which then could sweep us along, or, if we want to have what would you say, a seat at the table in policy making, or even just for institutions, what should we do in a particular class or in a business place? We got to know what we're getting into and understand the issues involved.
And so to make no choice is a choice in of itself, and to not speak when there is important things to be spoken about is also a choice. So, kind of want to set the stage a little bit. Okay, what is artificial intelligence? We talked about this a little bit before, but we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. At the very basic, artificial intelligence consists with agents that have internal states that can move through a medium and respond and make decisions based on internal states and the state of the medium that they're traveling. So this means that, if you're a little robot, you have an AI that determines I want to take a left or right if I see a wall in front of me, and it's got some internal, decision-making mechanism that's going to help it make a left or right, and then it will do that automatically and proceed on until it hits another wall. Within what we're currently working with nowadays, a lot of these large language models where the medium is the chat conversation between you and the bot, it's taking the input, the medium, which is your inputs, and making decisions based off of your inputs to give it an output based on its own internal states.
But, the examples that you picked, so a Roomba is a very low-level AI, right? Because it's going around the room and it tries its best, its poor little thing, to avoid bumping into the table. At first it'll do that, and then it maps out the room, unless you start screwing with it and moving things around.
Right.
Or a cat's, jumping at it or something like that. And it's responding to its environment and gradually using this internalized map to accomplish its task, which is to eat up all the dirt and dust and grime. And it'll tell you when it's full, too. So that's kind of cool.
That's useful.
Yeah. Rather than just getting all more and more full and eventually starting on fire, that would be a bad outcome.
Yeah. And you give it more sensors, and you can have it know different things about it. There's someone that have radar systems, and they can really map out the room instead of just kind of walking through it in a what we call random
haphazard way. Yeah.
Yeah, it will actually map the room first, and then make a more determined way to actually go through it in a systematic way instead of this, as you said, haphazard.
Yeah.
And so these things can go from the really, really basic to some things that are really, really quite impressive nowadays, and that's what we're doing with these AI art generators they are still AIs, but their internal states are much different than a Roomba, and they produce outputs that are not just controls of what direction, but actual art.
Yeah, at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, where a lot of people are very, very concerned about, what's going to happen with these things, it's interesting because I don't remember, I think it was last semester that they advised us, and now this semester required us to have some sort of AI policy that each of us crafted within our syllabus to give guidance to the students, because the students, they're not sure what to do with this either. It's kind of open territory. And the one that I came up with, there's not a lot of AI art or art in general in my classes because I teach humanities classes. They'll have a few visual projects, but they're usually like interpreting something. So like world religions, they're finding images and then telling me what the images actually signify and what their, meaning is to people in that particular religion. But in other classes, it's really, really important. If you're going to be submitting potentially somebody else's or something else's art, well, that could be a problem. So for me, it's more the textual issue, right? And as I thought about it, I was like, well, the students are using AI anyway. They should be, at least, if they use Grammarly. They're using low-level AI, which is, giving them advice that they would be getting at the Writing Center or from a friend who proofread their essay. This word would be a better word to use here. Maybe it could actually incorporate that quote from The Princess Bride about, not thinking you don't know what this word means, right? That would be kind of a cool thing to put in there, but most of our students wouldn't catch that reference, unfortunately, because it's too dated. But then when it comes to the large language model based inputting prompts and then spitting things out, there was a big debate about how should we view this? Is this cheating? Is this plagiarism? And I actually argued that it's not plagiarism, because to plagiarize, you actually have to have like a source text that you're taking something from, not a whole amalgam of all sorts of texts that you're sifting things from and then generating something new. But that it was cheating if the student was passing off, say, ChatGPT's stuff as their own work. That would violate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what my thing was to say, all right, you can use ChatGPT or, whatever other equivalent system you want, but you have to do two things. One is you have to actually document that, just as you would with any other borrowing from any text from somebody else, right? So you've got to cite it. And then the other thing is you're responsible, you're on the hook for making sure that the information that is being conveyed by that is accurate and factual. So if you're going to use it to answer a discussion forum about a book that you decided not to read because you were being a little lazy or cagey or something, and I'm just going to ask the computer to solve this for me. If the computer makes stuff up, well, you're on the hook for that. You're going to lose points because you didn't fact check it. And so, what is the outcome of this? Most of the students, it's not worth it to them to use it, right?
So someone's like, oh, give me a quick summary of The Grapes of Wrath, and it goes out, oh, The Grapes of Wrath is a book about a Italian World War II platoon that had many behind-the-lines exploits. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. Where did you come up with that hallucination?
Well, and how would they know if they don't actually know what they're asking about? I mean, this is, I think, one of the dangers, more with text-based stuff, although maybe this does apply to AI art. If you're asking, if you ask for make something in the style of Picasso, but you don't actually know what Picasso's style looks like, how do you know if it's getting it right or not? I imagine it's at this point in time, it is getting it right.
It usually does.
Yeah, but how would you know if you don't actually know the field?
That is great, and we'll get to it in a moment, but I want to also finish up the groundwork here. So neural networks are a very advanced type of AI that use what we call neural networks, which are a very rough simulacrum or a lossy version of what some computer researchers were trying to do to model a human mind, or a brain, and how neurons particularly interact with each other. It is not a one-to-one, obviously. But there are two main ways that we teach or we build these models. We have either teaching through having an actual teacher. So you say, like, here are the inputs, and I want you to have these expected outputs. And I just give like a whole bunch of those examples, and that works really well for very certain tasks. But one of the more interesting things is these undirected learning, which says it gives you a function, and it says try to maximize this function. And so one of the easiest ways that you can see this is they had a model that was running through all these old Atari 2600 games. And almost every single one of them has a little score in the top right counter. And it says, make that number go up. And so it has a little function that can determine what those pixels turn into numbers. I need to make those go up, and it tries 10,000 different things and figures out ways that no one had ever even tried before to like make that go up. It's really interesting to watch them like fumble in the dark, because they all start off and they go every which way, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know what buttons to press, and they're just firing randomly, and they're just like looking, and eventually they figure out certain things. But they have one of these things that's an issue with lots of different computer science tasks is falling into local maxima.
Yeah.
So you say like you're going up this way, and then you have a peak, but then there's a valley, and then there's another peak that's even higher to the right of that. And so a lot of times they'll get stuck in this little peak, and they'll try to optimize, and you have to make it sometimes go searching for different solutions.
I mean, it's sort of like getting caught in a cul-de-sac in a subdivision, and then needing to back out and find another way to get to.
Right.
Yeah.
And this process is called simulated annealing.
You used a term back there that I think maybe some of our listeners would need you to explain: lossy. And it also applies to, what we do here with recording, right?
Right. So, say you take a Xerox. You take a Xerox of a Xerox, and every time that you do that, you're going to get a little bit less information. The copy isn't as perfect, and yes, where exactly was I using lossy there?
Talking about the neural networks and the are they like a brain or not, or is a neuron like is a neuron in a neural network like a neuron in a brain?
So that this comes down to the train is not the map. And so anytime that you're trying to model something or to map something, the map is going to be a less granular representation of the thing. And so the perceptrons, which are the computer science term for what the idea of what a neuron would be in a brain, is a data structure that has an input and a number of inputs, and usually a number of inputs or a number of outputs, and they have a value between 0 and 1 that's supposed to potentially be infinite, but it's usually capped at like 256, to determine the value in which the perceptron itself will fire on to the next one. And so the number of inputs and the number of outputs and the number of layers within this structure produces outputs depending upon the values that are going into it and to the next layer. This is kind of in the weeds. The point is that this is when you said a simulacrum, a lossy version of what it is, because we're trying to map something that is real in silicon or computer code.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, in our analog lives, most of the things that we're doing are lossy in that way. I mean, every word that we use is, referring to all these different things, and, does it refer perfectly to any one single thing? No. Try to give a description of your emotional states at any given point in time that's actually accurate, rather than just saying, well, I feel mad or I feel sad or something like that. And you discover how difficult this is. Or coming back to the visual things, I mean, try to write down what your favorite artwork actually looks like, and see how well you can convey that. There's going to be an awful lot of loss going on of information, right?
Yeah. I've done this. I have a particular piece of art that I love.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's at the it's a sculpture in Madison Chazen Museum of Art.
Okay.
A
And you tried
rabbit.
to write like a written description.
I could write like a paragraph and it wouldn't come close to describing the intricacies of this particular piece. But to finish off, so a model that we're talking about when we're talking about AI is usually a neural network that's trained to do a thing. And models are incredibly useful, and they're definitely not going away. Any blanket bans against them are unlikely to actually work, as this is a very distributed technology, and they will be developed someplace in the world. And there's not any sort of sense of a single world government, so that there's no lever to pull to actually do that. So how do we live with these in a way that is actually useful?
As if there's a lever to pull for anything on the internet, right?
Right.
Like somebody can push a button or flip a switch, and now you can't get this. I mean, you can take sites down, but they have mirrors in other places. And
how long has the Pirate Bay been up?
Oh, I don't know.
Forever. It gets knocked down all the time. And pops right back up again. We've got some really big moral questions, and Greg, what do you think about any of the moral questions?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that before we even get into moral questions, I would say one of the signs how important this is the amount of, on the one hand, I would say largely undue optimism that a lot of people have about these things, and then the amount of just sheer fear that's out there. Like, we're going to talk about some of these things. Artists will no longer exist in 20 years, because anything that you want them to create, you'll just, create a set of prompts and get it yourself. So who would ever go to art school and get trained in these things? It'll become a boutique kind of craft or something like that, right? So, and then there's a lot of worries about, artists are very concerned about their own works being put into these models, whether they like it or not. If they, because these days, if you're an artist, I mean, I suppose you could have a non-online existence where you have nothing of yours available in a digital form. But most artists are on Instagram and a number of different platforms that are specifically for artists to showcase their work so that people will hire them, or so they can send a portfolio to a gallery and say, maybe you'd like to show my work, or, apply for grants, or all of the things that are essentially the economic lifeblood of a creative artist, whether you're doing traditional media like painting or sculpture or photography, or you're doing digital arts. There's a lot of worries about your stuff and your distinctive style getting copied by no longer somebody else plagiarizing you, because there's already like big companies out there stealing people's designs and putting them on, cheap T-shirts and stuff like that, not paying the artists anything. And but now you've got to worry about large language models owned, by companies taking your stuff and putting it into a database where it might remain forever.
Right. And so I guess I'll add a little bit to this, because you hit most of the major points here. There's this economic incentive or disincentive if you have there. Like at least there's the worry that these will supplant artists' jobs, and thus you'll have less art and you'll have less human creativity.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people in design who are like, well, I know that I can do better stuff than what can be generated, but the average person on the street who wants to hire me, how am I going to make the case to them that they should be supporting a human being when they can just get a subscription to, some platform and then put in 30 prompts and get what they want for their business logo or their latest announcement, that goes with their event or press release or something like that. I mean, this is the stuff that artists, it's their bread and butter.
Right. Another one is like, we feel weird as humans when a machine does a thing that we think that only humans should be doing. So it feels like there's something that is taking away the humanity by removing this creative pursuit that we like find as really intrinsically human.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, you could say like an artist has to build up their repertoire and skill and sensibility through a lot of, screwing around and doodling and experimenting. But I mean, you could say that these models are doing that when they're being trained in a way. It's not quite the same thing as like sitting in a boring class and, making a caricature of your teacher. I'm just thinking about a friend of mine from high school who used to do that. And he was very, very good, And of course, didn't do anything with his art, But, maybe there's some equivalent of doing things like that for AIs.
Yeah, to a different, like, I don't want to go too into the weeds of exactly how they do this. It's a diffusion technique, but yeah, they are doing this with, you have like, okay, take every single Picasso, and like this is, you label all these Picassos and it knows, at least the style of Picasso after it like has ingested all of these Picassos and can then start spitting out things that look like Picasso that are not Picassos.
Yeah, and it's not as if that hasn't been done by human beings who, I mean,
Exactly.
any artist who became popular, there are people who have imitated their styles. As a matter of fact, that's part of your training as an artist, at least with certain media, is you go into the museum and you copy paintings or drawings
that is exactly. Less maybe one of these worries is for whom does this benefit? Like, well, there's a Latin term for that, right?
Cui bono, yeah.
Cui bono, yeah.
Yeah.
This is, we taking money out? Yeah, exactly. And so, we have a whole bunch of different models. We've got Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 1 and 2. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and they do these things really well. And so, just as you were saying, like, we say that we can like own the intellectual property of individual pieces of art, and even potentially subsections of the piece of art, but not the technique which we use to produce that technique. And these are styles, right? And so, like, we're just as we were saying, like, you go to the museum and you sit down in front of a Monet or a O'Keeffe, and you sit there and you draw it, or then you take it home and maybe paint it, or that is the process of becoming an artist, is to ingest these arts and eventually find your own style and produce your own unique works.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because if we're thinking about visual stuff, like we got art that we consider art with a capital A, like way over here on the other side. And then we've got like, the kind of stuff that, we were talking about using prompts to generate. You've got a event coming up, you need a poster for it. Normally you would hire a graphic artist to produce that, but you put it into that and you have like 30 designs generated by an AI and you're like, I like this one, we'll go with this. And then you've got the stuff that's like, really low level, like a logo. And, you can claim that somebody is infringing on your style if you're a corporation and somebody, like say, Pepsi or Coke or something like that. You can make claims, and they do in lawsuits. And every once in a while they win, and a lot of times they lose, because just making that cursive for the Coca-Cola, if you wanted it to say like, Poopa-Cola or something like that. I'd probably avoid the cola part too, so,
Probably.
Poopa-Pooka or something like that. You probably could get away with that, but the corporation might sue you anyway.
Yeah.
So there's like a spectrum, right?
Yeah. But we do make a delineation. We don't know exactly where, like, the delineation is a little bit fuzzy, but there's definitely, like, on the edges, it's really quite apparent.
Okay.
And so, I guess I'm not trying to make the distinction, like, exactly where that line is, but that there are two different things here, at very least. And so, the very same things, like, we don't, copyright styles, because if someone like copyrighted rock or R&B or country or something, then like we would lose almost all of our music. we can.
Yeah. I mean, the difficulty of doing any of those is that they're so vast. So just to give you a kind of a in the weeds example, I do this classic metal class with some of my friends, and one of the important musical history parts of it is the new wave of British heavy metal. And the new wave of British heavy metal, like, revitalized the whole metal scene in the late 70s, early 80s. It came over here to the States and other places, and it was really quite important. But when we were like, well, what is the new wave of British heavy metal sound? There isn't a sound. There's a bunch of different interconnected sounds, and they have certain features in common with each other and others not. And, there's different genres within that as well. So it would be very difficult to do that. It's sort of like saying, let's copyright painting,
right,
or photography. You just can't do anything that large, but you can certainly say that, like, somebody, Anselm Kiefer, both in painting and photography, has a style, that you could emulate. Yeah.
But does that make it, like we were just talking about, like you take a Picasso, or just because he's alive, does that make it any less wrong to emulate his style?
Well, this is where I guess a lot of it would come down for many people to the question, why are you doing it, right? And, the answers to that could be, well, I'm an art student and I want to learn how this person did their thing. Just like if you're a musician and you want to get better, you play the stuff that other musicians have played and you kind of try to figure it out from the inside. I mean, I think you can say that with coding too, right? You look at somebody else's code and you're like, well, what the hell was this person thinking, and then you see it. So, I mean, even with mathematics, following along somebody else's proof, there's often more than one way to prove something. And you can be like, why did they take that step there? Well, now I understand it. So there's a educative motif to it, you could say. And then it could be you just want, like at the other end, I just want to rip them off. I just want to pretend that I'm this person and get paid to do their stuff. Okay, you could say that's ethically problematic, right?
Are you talking about like being a cover band or type thing, or are you talking about like the Monkees to the Beatles?
Well, I mean, a cover band doesn't pretend that they're the actual band.
Right.
So if you go to see a Kiss cover band, they're putting on the makeup, right? Odds are every single one of those people in that band is younger than at least two of the people in actual Kiss, who just retired, finally, because they're in their 70s.
I just realized that Kiss is one of those perfect bands that you can just hand down generation to generation.
Well,
there's so much makeup on it that you can cosplay that forever. It's kind of like the Blue Man Group.
This is an interesting one, and I think we can tie it in with this. They had a idea they were kicking around for a while, because there's two original members, Gene Simmons, the Demon, and Paul Stanley, the Star Child, right? And they've got two other guys, Tommy Thayer and I think Eric Carr, dressed up as the Spaceman, who was originally Ace Frehley, and the Tomcat, who was originally Peter Criss, right? And then they're all in the makeup, and they play great, and the younger guys are younger, they're like in their 40s or maybe 50s. So Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, who own the band, were like, well, what if we just found another guy to be Gene Simmons and another guy to be Paul Stanley? And we put him in the makeup, and they've got the sound down, because you can easily find musicians who love Kiss and would love to step in there, and we'll just license it,
Yeah.
And they will go out and they'll be us, and we'll collect the money until we die, and then maybe it'll continue on even after us. So they were actually like kicking that idea around, and they decided not to do it. I'm not sure why, but what did they decide to do instead? Have you seen the recent?
No.
So they created avatars, computer-generated avatars that
I'm not surprised.
look terrible. I mean, people who look at them, they're like, what in the hell is this anime crap? Because it's really quite silly. They've got all sorts of weird computer generated things floating around them, and they look I mean, I'm sure some people like the aesthetic, and I'm sure the guys who signed off on it must like it. But that is their continued graphic representation that presumably can go and deliver concerts somewhere.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I feel like they've done like the fake Tupac, and there's a company that does that, and they
Oh,
actually make
really?
really lifelike representations. It's weird that they took that
Are they
more.
holograms or are
Yeah,
they okay? Because I was going to say
yeah,
you wouldn't want like an animatronic thing.
no. um,
But I mean that is a visual image, right?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's not the same thing as these static images that we're talking about. But why do
Right.
these images have to be static? I mean, if you go to the these things that they have now, and I can't remember what the original name is, but it's like they've done it with Van Gogh and Monet. They've come here to the Wisconsin Center, and you go in and the whole
Oh, the
room
experiences.
is it Experience
I
Van
think
Gogh?
so. It's
Or?
like the Van Gogh experience.
Yeah, and they've got the images, but they're moving.
Mm-hmm.
So and they're transforming into each other. So there must be some computer generated stuff making that happen.
Yeah.
I mean that could be done. I mean, imagine like you had a room with projectors in it, or just screens on the wall, and you're like, I'm super into Claude Monet. AI, whatever it is, please generate for me endless variations on Claude Monet's water lilies.
Yeah. My uncle would love that. He was into Monet so much that he named one of his cats Claude.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I guess one of the things I wanted to make sure that we were talking about was this worry about like the art and where it is
Yeah.
in these models. And so, yes, they do build models out of artworks, but the artworks themselves don't reside as image representations within the model. They are there in the data set that you build it from,
Right.
but once it is put into the data set, all you have is these nodes and the values that represent the edges between the two nodes that make up the actual model. And so it's a distinction, but it is, I think, an important distinction when we're talking about like them saying that there are some artists will make the argument that it's actually in the model.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually copied. They took it, they looked at it, and did something that we just talked about: going to museums, looking through art books, finding arts that you like, and you ingest it. And you understand it, and then you can reproduce a simulacrum without actually having the actual thing there to reproduce pixel for pixel.
I wonder if there's anybody, and I think you'd really have to be quite a Luddite to be making this claim, but the art world out there is full of quirky types.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anybody who's like, I don't want my work being transformed into a bunch of digital data, essentially a set of relations between pixel colors, right? That's inherently wrong. You're ruining my art in the process. And I mean, you could say to them, well, I mean, your painting's still there, right? I mean, we didn't destroy it in order to do that. We didn't put it into a machine that broke it down into its component parts or something. But I suppose they could, there's probably people out there who are like, don't digitize me, man,
Yeah. So I guess
have you seen anything like that, or I mean, would that just be like totally out there fringe?
There are some artists that will like. There's actually quite a few that don't want them as part of the data set.
Yeah.
There is a smaller subset that think it's actually in the model itself. But I guess the argument that we're talking about specifically is like, who gets to like ape an image? Who, like, the whole learning process is every human that wants to be an artist goes through this thing of trying to reproduce other great pieces of work, or at least other great styles. And we don't have zero problem about that. And this is actually one of the main cruxes of this whole issue, is that we have something that feels wrong, as we talked about in our moral issues here, and we're trying to put our finger on why it's wrong.
Yeah.
So from the standpoint, the AVI is not doing anything different from any other artist. No artist needs to pay for a license to all the art they've ever seen in every museum or book they've ever seen, and this would be absurd and would prevent any new art from being produced ever again. If I had to,
you only, so like if you're an artist and let's say you take a picture, right? You go into a museum and it's of a living artist, so it's not like they're long dead and you don't have to worry about them. You take a picture of somebody's artwork, and you can put that on your social media if you want to and be like, oh, saw this cool thing, and you're not going to get in trouble. It's when you try to sell it yourself that you wind up in problems, right?
Right. So AI art isn't plagiarism or copyright infringement in the traditional sense. But it still doesn't stop us from feeling this weirdness about it. And so I wanted to just grab into writing really quick. This is a very similar thing that happens, that we read all these things if we want to be a novelist, and we find things that we like. We find little bits and pieces. And hell, even Hunter S. Thompson, the great Gonzo journalist, wrote and transcribed The Great Gatsby word for word on a typewriter, not once, but twice, in order to get the feeling of what it's like to write a great American novel.
Wow.
Right. I don't know if everyone should be doing that, but that's some dedication.
That sounds like some tedious work there.
But like we ingest all these things and all of our influences, and it'd be like if every fantasy writer since from the 19th or the 20th and the 21st century had to pay royalties to J.R.R. Tolkien because he's like this godfather. Like you can't get around his influence within fantasy.
Yeah.
And people don't do that because that's just not how we create art. That's not the process. And so this whole idea of you've got to license these things doesn't seem to fit the paradigm that we've been working with already.
I wonder if part of this is the vague feeling that this is wrong is associated with the idea that it's not being earned by the person who's using an engine, essentially, right? If we want to use old-fashioned 19th century terms, they're using a calculatory engine to create this thing, and all they're doing is like pushing a couple buttons. Now they're they're not just pushing a couple buttons; they're using words, and they have to. The more descriptive you are with your prompts, the better stuff you tend to get. And they also have to do kind of like look through all the different selections and say, well, this one sucks. I like this one. Let's work on this a bit. So it's not like they're not doing anything, but you compare the amount of
time.
And the sort of the back trail of, so you learned how to use the English language and how to throw prompts into a computer learning the English language, well, you did that as a kid, and then throwing the prompts into the computer, that didn't take you that long. This person has been working on art since middle school, and it feels like maybe what you're doing in generating AI art that would substitute for an artist, a professional artist's work, is a kind of getting ahead. So it's sort of like taking steroids to bulk up at the gym. You still have to lift weights,
right?
But you're going to have some pretty crazy gains. I mean, you're also going to have some nasty side effects. But when we see people doing that, we're like, yeah, that's kind of cheating, Or what else? Where else do we feel people are cheating?
Well, just to it comes down to it's not even steroids there. You still gotta do the work a little bit, but it still takes time. Whereas this, you can produce a piece of art that would have taken an artist 40 or more hours potentially, and he can do it in seconds. So this is literally thousands of times the rate. Of a good artist doing something in a similar quality, or probably
just
better.
In terms of the technical work itself,
right? This seems to be this great leap forward, at least from at the output point of view. Doesn't mean that it's actually going to be good art, technically potentially proficient. But once again, this is this thing that is we have this like deep fear of like, is this doing something that humans are supposed to do exclusively? But
well, let's explore that one. I mean, that seems to be different in kind than the feeling that like you're doing something unearned. You're cheating somehow. So if I understand you right, you're saying art maybe it's like other activities, and maybe we want to talk about this. But we'll probably hit on this this topic of AI and automation and things like that again. So the thing that comes immediately to mind is like there are people out there who are saying, well, in the future, what we're going to have are sex dolls that you put an AI in and it falls in love with you and treats you like you're the best person in the world, and then most people, in a certain sense, rightly so, are like, that's creepy. Don't do that. And why do they do that? Because they feel like, well, this is a distinctively human activity that shouldn't be turned over to machines. Reproducing art, like, you make a nice print and you tell a robot that, let's say it's actually, fairly smart robot, hey, make me 1,000 of these. Well, that's what we do with the Xerox machine, right?
Right.
Or a printer. But having it doing the actual human creative work, that's where a lot of people would say, "Oh, no, you're transgressing there." Yeah. But I mean, artists have done things in the past like automatic writing or just dropping paint onto a canvas in random ways that seems pretty mechanical.
Yeah.
Is that no longer worthy of human beings? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I feel like there is a je ne sais quoi about what humans produce. Like, for example, I just recently commissioned a couple artists to help me produce a logo, and I went looking for art that was trying to help me kind of like solidify the idea that I was looking for.
Yeah.
I did use an art generator just to like throw some things and see what that could like potentially do. It was mostly for like trying to like solidify some art ideas of imagery kind of together.
Was that helpful for you or not? What? Was it helpful for you to do that or not?
Slightly. I felt like I needed a better model to work with. Because I've seen some other models that can actually kind of sort of produce logos and whatnot, but it felt like it was way off the mark. But only through this like back and forth with an artist that actually had the skill that I could convey with words and pictures exactly to them what I wanted, was I able to get something that really felt like I could represented what I was looking for. So that back and forth collaborative aspect of it, in part because they are able to speak back to me, not just with like an image, but have that conversation.
So in that case, it's the dialogue between people that's an important part of the creative process. And I think that's really important to point out, because a lot of people have this mistaken idea that creativity is like this thing that you do all by yourself and it comes totally out of you or what you're, seeing in the environment, the isolated artist. But that ain't the way art really works most of the time. You are seeking feedback and there's like an iterative process. I was wondering though, let me throw this idea at you. So if somebody wanted to say, okay, AI generated art is, it's stepping over the line. It's doing something that should be distinctively human. Well, there is something distinctively human that's happening that leads to the AI art being better, and that's giving the prompts. I mean, the more descriptive and articulate you are, the better art you're gonna, or the more interesting art you're gonna get. If you're just like, hey man, make me a wizard on a mountain with a dragon overhead, for my fantasy van or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna get some schlock, right? But if you're like, okay, what I want to see is this, and I want to see it in this way, and this person's style should be incorporated with these features, but not these features. I mean, there is this whole thing out there that people are trying to make into a discipline now that they call prompt engineering.
Mhm.
Maybe that's a distinctively human activity, you
Right.
know?
As well as like that's for like a whole image, and there's a whole thing like with in painting where you say like I want this, you get a first image, you chop out a section of it. Like actually, I want there to be a fairy princess on a toadstool right in the
Okay.
place where I just erased, and we'll do that and keep everything else. So, but I want to get to this new paradigm, but like there's this just finish up the problem here is that there's this worry about like all these workers losing their jobs and
Yeah,
replacing
yeah.
with something um, made with the human hand with a machine. And so, can we find some moral legal framework that addresses this issue and mollifies the feeling that something is morally off? Um, so I guess I had an issue with a lot of the arguments that people were using against this AI art, um, because you can copyright a particular image or
Yeah.
like subsets of images, but they can't really copyright a style because then you've basically destroyed the ability to actually teach our art students art. Um,
Yeah, and style also is something that it's rather intangible,
mhm,
and it might not be all that absolutely distinctive to a person. And I read something recently from it's in the music field. So Eddie Van Halen is known for this really new technique, which he didn't come up with. He actually took it from other people and then refined it into tapping,
mhm,
right? And that was like his distinctive guitar style. And I was reading this interview with this other guitarist from another band that was big in the 80s called Autograph. And he came up doing that style too. He was a lead
mhm,
guitarist. He didn't learn it from Eddie Van Halen. They were doing it basically around the same time. And Autograph was opening for Van Halen.
mhm.
And this guy was so good at doing the tapping thing that he actually like wrote some music books about it, and I think maybe did some videos as like learn how to tap, right?
Yeah.
So Van Halen's management went to him and said, "You may not do any tapping while you're on stage opening for Van Halen."
Mm,
And he was like, "Well, this is kind of BS, right?" So he went to Eddie Van Halen and he was all kind of, ticked off, and he's like, "Hey, where's this coming from, man?" And Eddie Van Halen hadn't heard about that, and so he explained it to him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to talk with these guys. You go ahead and do
yeah.
whatever you want to on stage, because he's great. He's not threatened by somebody else doing a similar technique that isn't exactly the same,
Mhm.
Whereas somebody who is more insecure, not as good of a
Yeah.
musician, might have been like, "Yeah, man, you can't steal my
That's mine.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right." And
Yeah.
I would imagine that in the art world, there's probably lots and lots of stuff like that where you could be like, "Well, this one here kind of looks like he's stealing stuff from this person over here," and you'd be like, "Well, that ain't the case, you know. They different people can kind of converge on the same idea, you know."
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? Newton and Leibniz for
Oh, I was
calculus.
just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is the artist class a thing that we want to sacrifice for cheaper art and who owns styles if we were going to like build these AI art generation models? So like as we're talking about between like art and styles, here's a potential proof on ownership. So things can be owned by no one, an individual, a group, an entity, or everyone. So this is a none, some, or what? None, one, some, or all.
Okay.
Um, if someone owns a thing, then they have use to it. Styles can't be owned by one person, a group, or an entity. So that is basically one or some.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and they are not owned by no one, as we all have free use to access them.
Oh,
Therefore,
yeah.
styles are collective property owned of humans.
Okay.
And so, therefore, AI art is a collective goods issue and not an intellectual property issue. And we already have frameworks for that. So we have public airways, we have public waterways, we have public mineral and lumber resources.
Well, would that require then? because all these AI art generators at this point in time, and I think we can generalize this about other AI things that are similar. So I won't say like, your Roomba or something like that,
Right.
but ChatGPT or stuff like that. They're owned by companies that, because it takes that sort of level of resource. You can't just like build this, like in the early days of computing, making computers out in your garage or something like that. You really need corporate resources to be able to do this. Does that mean that those corporations, insofar as they're putting together platforms that are allowing for this, they have to be treated like public utilities? Because I don't think those companies are going to like that idea.
I wouldn't call them public utilities, but think of it like a lumber company.
Okay.
They go and they want to harvest some trees on public land.
Yeah.
They bid on and buy lumber access.
Yeah.
And then they have certain responsibilities to replant those trees afterwards, and then the benefits of those then go to either to public government coffers, or direct payments to citizens, or providing public goods. So, for example, Alaska, they have a UBI. Anyone in Alaska gets resource rights for the oil and other minerals that are being extracted from Alaska. Yeah. And it just automatically gives everyone
a certain
payment
universal
out to them.
Basic income, yeah.
And
what's the equivalent? So I guess two things here.
Okay.
What's the equivalent with AI art and these companies then to the universal basic income, your little cut of the revenue that's generated? Yeah. And then I'm struggling to see with the, extracting resources, but also replenishing them, cutting down trees and then replacing them. What is the equivalent of that here with artwork?
Well, I would say it's probably easiest to do with the mineral rights.
Okay.
And so, like, hey, there's this collective thing that we all own. We all get benefits from it. If you want to have some private ownership of that, then you need to provide a benefit to at the collective ownership of that. And so I would think, like, because we're talking about art and we want to continue to promote art, the best way to do that would be to create some sort of arts funding. And so, like, you want to be an artist? Hey, we want culture and we want art. These guys are over here where they're using that and they're going to make a whole shitload of money. But because they're using a public resource to produce that art and those things, they need to pay in to make sure that there are more people that can do art. And instead of having this kind of sometimes perverse
antagonistic
art
sort of relationship
for money as like a job specifically, you can do art for art's sake, and potentially even, like, obviously constraints are sometimes really good for art, but also to allow them the more freedom to produce whatever they actually want.
Yeah, so I mean, to make this a little bit more tangible and concrete, the money that these companies are generating, and some of them might not be making any money at this point in time, right? But let's assume they're making money, right?
Right.
Would go into like funding galleries or supporting more grants for artists, or the sort of things that already exist. Right. That would make it possible for more people to spend at least some of their time having that be their main source of income. And we'd put aside all the worries about, like, well, who's going to disperse the money, who's going to make the decisions about what's good art and what's bad art and stuff like that. But I mean, that's not a bad idea, actually. I kind of like that. What would happen then to people using these platforms to do the sort of things that people are doing today, which is like, hey, I want some cool art for my album or my poster or something like that. Mid-Journey, make it for me, Right now, it seems like you can do that. If you're actually a subscriber, that's okay, right? But you might make tons and tons of money with something that you're getting from one of these AI generated art stuff would the companies actually be cool with that, or are they going to want to cut?
Oh, these are the minutia that makes, sometimes can destroy an idea. I guess this was mostly I'm not buying the argument that they were originally making, but I feel that this as a public's good issue is a better framework to actually...
I think there's potential here. And I also do like there's two things I like about it. One is you're saying, okay, there's a lot of arguments floating around out there. They're popular arguments. They're not really good arguments. I think that's an important thing to signal. And then I also like getting away from the sort of like zero-sum antagonistic current paradigm that we typically have with this sort of stuff. Like, this damn AI stuff, it's going to put us all out of business, whether it's art or content writers or, there's worries about doctors are going to be replaced by AIs with robots. Because, they are using AI in X-ray imaging to find things that doctors have a hard time finding. Great, that's awesome.
Yeah.
If it results in less people having health problems, that's really cool. I mean, you still need a radiologist to look at the stuff and sign off on it. But I think
they're in general actually higher rate of like finding cancerous polyps or whatever than your best radiologist. It's just they're built to do that one thing. Yeah.
So, I kind of like let's not make it all about, well, we were joking before this about something coming from a sci-fi series, the, Dune series by Frank Herbert, and the butler in Jihad, and the line, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind," right? No AIs.
No AIs.
I think we're going to have to deal with AI, so we better find a productive way to deal with it in some way, right?
Absolutely. So I want a couple final thoughts here. There's author Will Durant who summarizes Aristotle's poetics position as the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. And so we can take photos and have like perfect representations of things, but what is the point of art? Is it to produce art for art's sake or for money's sake? Like what is the actual telos, the ends of art?
Yeah, and I kind of think for any given work of art, it's probably got multiple ones, right? I mean, you can ask an artist, why did you paint this way? And they'll give you some great song and dance and story, which they might be making up on the spot, or it might correspond to their artist statement about, I was thinking about this. They do want to sell their work, they do want to survive. So,
well, but it's art to survive. If they had another way to survive and actually produce their art, it might be different art, but. Regardless, we're at the end of our show here, and so we leave you today with the words of President John F. Kennedy. If art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it takes him.